Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here today. So, know me, I'm half of the electric duo. My wife is the other half, Liv. You'll see us running around today. If you want to jump on camera, by all means, we have a YouTube channel where we love sharing these stories from the EV Charging Summit with all of our audience. We have a great list of panelists today. But today's we're talking about from adoption to acceleration, building infrastructure in a demand-led EV market. We all are here. We all know that EVs are the future. We've been talking about the past few months, the EV winter, EV reset. There's a lot of changes coming, and today we're going to hit on a lot of those. So I'm going to introduce the panelists now. We'll do our mic check by letting them introduce themselves. So we'll start with Elizabeth Irvin, if you could say where you work.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Irvin. I am the Deputy Director in the Office of Planning and Programming at the Illinois Department of Transportation. And my role is focused on managing sustainable initiatives for the department.
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Almeida, and I'm the Director of Clean Energy Transportation at Pacific Gas and Electric Company. We're a large utility in North and Central California. My team's focus is on two kind of key strategic goals of how can we reach 3 million EVs and 550 megawatts of flexible load through those EVs by 2030. And so we have programs, incentive programs to focus on that. We build infrastructure to support that for specific fleets as well as all of our customers. And we are looking at and working on ways to integrate UDs into the grid through rates, managed charging, bidirectional market.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Maten. I'm the Director of EV Policy and Regulatory Affairs for General Motors. So I handle my team and I handle all aspects of electric vehicle policy, from incentives to infrastructure to EV battery and supply chains at the federal and state and even local level. Great to be here.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Yuval Steiman. I'm with Hyundai North America. I'm Director of Eco-Mobility and Market Research. So my scope includes the market research function at Hyundai, and then obviously infrastructure projects and in-vehicle technology. I really appreciate the opportunity to have.
Thank you all for being here. We're going to dive right into this because I know that we could spend an hour with each of you, but we have a limited amount of time. But for our auto manufacturers, I think we'll start with you guys. Over the past 3 years, we've had I think a big shift in our EV market as far as the type of consumers. There were people that have been here for years that have bought EVs and were the early adopters. Late last year, especially with the tax credits going away, I think we reached out and got a lot of people that not necessarily were EV enthusiasts, but it just made financial sense. So my question to you is, what do you think the difference is with these new EV owners and EV charging infrastructure expectations and just EV charging expectations in general?
Yeah, I'm happy to take any new. Please jump in, Mike. Definitely, I think we could probably qualify everyone in this room as an early adopter for EVs, but I think we're well past that phase, right? We used to be, people knew the technology, they knew the product, they'd go into the showroom and there wouldn't be a lot of discussion. They'd be like, I want that Ioniq, for example, but we are firmly in what we're calling early core or majority phase, where, as you alluded to, we have to sell the product. We have to explain for a customer why this fits their lifestyle, why this fits their needs, why this is a good solution for transportation. Not necessarily, oh, this is an EV and this is what you need to drive. How does this meet what you need to do every day? And part of that is charging, because as we see a lot of the barriers to entry, the reasons people may hesitate to buy an EV is related to charging. So it's part of the education process, but it's definitely selling the product. And you mentioned the EV tax credit. I think that just makes the product more central to why this is a good solution for people.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think in the last 3 years, we've really gone from what I would call a supply constrained EV marketplace, where there weren't a lot of makes and models available on dealer lots, to really a demand constraint. I was just looking at inventory this morning. We have about 40,000 EVs on dealer lots all across the country. And that demand constraint didn't start with the expiration of the tax credit. It EV sales were generally flat across 2025 and even late 2024, just kind of nationally. So we bumped up into this, as you've all said, kind of this adoption curve kind of asymptote for now. And we have to figure out how to get past it. I think we all know more chargers installed last year than ever before, more DC fast chargers installed. That is not well known among the driving or purchasing public. So, I would say the other dynamic that's happened in the marketplace is with the tax credit, but even after the expiration of the tax credit, affordability as a reason to not consider EVs has actually gone way down. Now there's affordability in just the new vehicle market in general, but the affordability of EVs versus ICE vehicles, that gap was closed. And what we see though, is it's still that, and why we're all here, it's still that infrastructure gap, whether it's real or perceived, is still very much out there. Is there enough? Where can I get a charge? Will the charger work? How much am I paying for the charge? How do I install a home charger? So all of those still very much in consumers' minds. And again, I think as we move forward into this next phase of EV adoption, it's critical that we try and close that gap, both in kind of actual reality, but also in perception of how easy it is, how convenient it is to own an EV.
Can I grant answer?
Oh, yes. So, because I think what you said sparks a lot of interest in something, the product has to be good. And I think you think of the EV, but the vehicle has to be good. From our perspective, our products is how you work with utility, how you connect to the utility, how you install a charger, and that's how to be good. And it's not that great for a lot of utilities, our utility included. We spent a lot of time, actually 2 years ago, going through some analysis because we're in a unique state. We have about 840,000 EVs in our service territory. So we're kind of seeing things before you see it in the rest of the country. And we have certain counties within our service territory where we've hit 50% of their vehicle sales. So they're well past that early majority of states. But we have a lot across our service territory where we're somewhere around 26, 27%. So we're right around the chasm. If you're familiar, I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with this, that technology distribution curve. You hit that chasm, are you going to be able to cross from early adopters or early majority? And so we can't solve the vehicle side. What we can focus on though is how to make it really easier to connect to the grid. So some of the stuff that that we're really focusing on right now is, are there ways that you can just get you access to the grid a lot faster? If you have to upgrade your panel, then it's going to cost $5,000 to do that. And it's going to take 6 months. No, you're not going to do it. So I think the point I want to make is it's important for us to think about it from a market perspective. What are all the different actors? What can we do to kind of make that product good? Because we won't hit the next phase unless it is good.
And I guess I jump in from the state perspective. In Illinois, we have a goal of about a million EVs on the road by 2030. I just checked as of yesterday, I think we were at 166,000. So, which is great progress, but we got a ways to go similarly to get to that sort of general adoption. And I think what we've learned on the government side is we spent a lot of the last few years learning. The learning curve has been as huge as the technology adoption curve, and learning how we collaborate across silos, both internally to government, to the industry, to the utilities. I think we're at a phase now where we've gotten a lot of those connections built. We've learned a lot of those lessons, and we're really trying to scale up and move quickly. About 1,000 ports came online in Illinois last year. We've awarded between federal funded through Illinois NEVI program and state funding through some state programs, 550 locations, and we've got about 150 of those online. So, and that will be continuing to ramp up. So I think similarly to what we're seeing on the private sector, the public sector, despite all of the uncertainty, we're really hitting kind of a new gear.
So we'll stay focused on that, the public sector. I imagine you have a bit of a juggling act because, first of all, you have the funding that's there and about there and back and all of that. But also here, you're balancing a lot of what your constituents want, whether it's the NEVI funding for the long road trips, but you're also trying to balance, I would imagine, multifamily housing, rural communities. How does the state of Illinois manage all of that, as well as, the partnerships that you have that are dependent on this federal funding that could be there or could not be there?
Yeah, I think one thing that has really set Illinois up for success in the long term is that you had some state legislation similar to what we heard about in Nevada that was read around the same time as the bipartisan infrastructure law that set that goal for 1 million EVs on the road, established a position for a state EV officer, and really kind of built that infrastructure for collaboration so that each of our state agencies that have a piece of this pie can kind of work on their strengths. So at the Department of Transportation, we've been really focused on NEVI. We've been focused on some of the medium and heavy duty vehicle and goods movement side of this. The Illinois EPA has been running their programs, both on EV charging infrastructure, as well as vehicle rebates. Our Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity has really been focused on both the workforce and the business attraction side. And then maybe some unlikely partners, our parks have been really, that's been kind of a fun thing where you've seen a demand for charging. Parks districts, our procurement office, we've all had to work together to make this work. So I think we were sort of set up for success by starting that infrastructure before all the federal money started coming in, and we're still working. We've got a lot of that federal money and state money to manage, continuing to go forward. So we're not taking our foot off the gas or the maybe the pedal, so to speak. Even despite some of the uncertainty at the federal level.
And that's something I've heard last year was like whether NEVI funding goes away or other federal sources go away, the industry as a whole is like, we're moving forward with or without them. I see some heads nodding. And it sounds like the state of Illinois is like, that's part of it. Like you guys have the foundation, but you're also like helping people find those sources, but also helping them with policies to make those decisions.
Yeah, we're really looking to build an ecosystem that can make the state a leader in the country on EV adoption.
Very cool. Now, with PG&E, you mentioned that you guys are doing your part to make sure that things are getting deployed faster and the interconnections are done faster. So, do you have like example? Because I know that we've seen some charging stations in the past that took years to get activated, but now we're seeing stations that like they pop up on the map with a permit process, they get built, and then in a matter of a month they're up and online.
That's super fast. So we took a lot of freight. So my team has about 10 years of experience building the charging infrastructure, starting with level 2 charging infrastructure for multi-unit dwellings and workplaces. That's kind of where I got my where I cut my teeth in this space. We've expanded that to fleets, and we have a multi-year program where we're just about like finished and committed all of our sites that are going to deliver over 7,000 medium and heavy duty vehicles over the next 5 years, which is pretty impressive to see kind of that amount of growth. So we've got probably like 2 more years of that program right now. What we've done though as a company and as a state is we codified a grid connection, a subsidized grid connection for public charger infrastructure and multiple dwellings into utility rules. Started with the bill, something called AB 841, which essentially said the utility shall create a utility rule, a tariff. These are all like utility specs. Like essentially what it is says that if you are going to build charging infrastructure in the state of California, and you're going to invest in anyone in an investor in utilities, San Diego Gas and Electric, Southern California Gas or Pacific Gas and Electric Company, you're going to get a subsidized rate connection. There's some hooks to it. You got to be there for 5 years. You got to it's only for the EV portion of it, but we're going to subsidize that. So that's one piece. And it's important to say that because what it does is it transitions it from a utility type of program. So like my team, which is very much focused on just EV, into embedding it into utility fabric. How are you doing that so that that is part of a standard operating procedure? And it wasn't super great at first. It took a long time. We also, in the state of California, particularly in my utility, we have something called capacity constraints, where we had load growth that shot up because of a high EV adoption and just economic development, and our distribution grid. So the upstream, the substations and the lines that go from the substation to that secondary transfer. So those transfers on a whole, that didn't keep up in pace. So we had lots of kind of people that were waiting for that. So we did a couple things. One, we looked at innovative solutions so that we could see, all right, well, you want 3 megawatts today. We can only give you 2 megawatts for most of the time, but for like 98% of the period of the year, we'll give you 3 megawatts. So as long as you can kind of flex your load, we're great for that. So we can connect you faster. So we're able to connect people a lot faster through something called a flexible service connection, which has now been replicated in a lot of utilities around the country. And we're seeing that. I was at a conference in DC a couple of weeks ago, and lots of discussion about that, of like, what are you doing in California? How do we incorporate that into other utilities? So I think it's a good way of doing that. We've also spent a ton of time just really focusing on how to build a production model for how to build grid connections for EV charge. So it's not super sexy, but it's really important. We have a weekly stand-up where we have 5 different teams that are responsible for kind of building the grid connection. We set a target for the amount of sites that we want to build throughout the year, and we're problem solving every week. Why are we hitting that target? Why are we off track? What are our catchback grants in order for us to, come back and get back on track? And we've been able to speed up the connect strategy pretty significantly. It still takes 18 months to energize a charging infrastructure, which there's a lot of customer side of that. There's a lot of permitting. There's a lot of legislation and permit rules that have proved that, but there's still a lot of way for growth within permitting. But on our side, we're getting faster. And we're doing that, I think, primarily because, one, we've created a policy that helps induce demand. 2, we've focused on the fact we've created targets, internal targets within our company in order for us to like really organize. And then 3, we've tried and create this production model so that we are like learning as we're going, and we're keeping ourselves accountable. So if we don't hit every month, our teams have to go to our executive vice president and say to them, we had a target of 40 sites. We went to 30 sites. Why are we off? What is our cash director plan in order to get back to those 40 sites? And that accountability and that transparency, I think, has really helped to really drive improvement.
So for you all likely, you guys are OEMs. A lot of times we think of, you guys just give us the cars, but you are both, very involved in policy, dealing with utilities, dealing with state governments, dealing with the federal government. In one area that I think is a hot topic that I hopefully is a hot topic is V2G and getting that advanced and move forward by the OEMs, but that takes a lot of coordinations with the states and the utilities. How are GM and Hyundai Motor Group working on doing that part of it?
Yeah, sure. I was recognizing the parallels from the first question to the second question to ask. We have customers who are early adopters, and we're crossing this technology adoption curve. You can think about states and utilities in the same way. We have the early adopters here, but there's 50 states and 3,000 utilities who are also learning, who are also now facing discussions about AI and data centers and what's the grid going to do, and kind of that attention has almost moved on. So part of our role as OEMs is to make sure that EVs, transportation electrification, stays at least at near the top of the priority list for both states and utilities. Sorry, but you asked about V2G. I think you have, and I would just say more broadly, vehicle grid integration. Right. So there's everything from, call it, managed charging, both kind of passive and active to vehicle to home to vehicle to load. And ultimately the end game would be vehicle to grid, right? And in places with high adoption, that might be a more realistic scenario in a few years. But I think you have to kind of walk before you can run. We have our GM Energy business that is looking to do a lot of the work on vehicle grid integration. We have a pilot with PG&E. We have a pilot also in Michigan. That is still very much in its nascent phase. And what I mean by that is the standards and protocols necessary for that are still very, very much in the early days of adoption. So we'd love to use this opportunity with maybe a little bit of a lull in EV adoption to call for a lot more work around all of that standards development so that when EVs do become more of a choice for more consumers, they can take advantage of managed charging programs or vehicle to home programs. But we are still all in. We plan on having bidirectional capability on all our EVs going forward. We think that's important. And again, feeding it back to the grid is kind of an end game, but let's really focus on getting at least managed charging programs in place to make it more affordable, to make it easier to own an EV, and then move forward to that vehicle to grid future. But I think it is absolutely something that's on our radar. And again, we have a whole business unit working on it.
Yeah. So echo those thoughts. Obviously, that's an important area that Hyundai is also carefully looking at. But I just want to bring it back from a customer standpoint, right? You said crawl and then walk and then run. I mean, the V2G, sending energy back to the grid, that's so early stage relative. You can do the analogy to when EV adoption is so small, maybe 10, 15 years ago. So from a consumer standpoint, to me, it's all part of the education process and explaining to them why this is a great solution. So basics, it's transportation. It meets my needs. We address the charging concerns. We talk a lot about here about home charging. What an incredible unlock. A lot of people don't realize that. To be able to wake up and then you go out to the garage and you have a quote unquote full tank of gas and you don't ever have to go to a pump. Not everybody can do that, obviously. That's why multi-dwelling units and charging infrastructure is important. But in terms of education, explaining to people what a great solution for everyday transportation. And then you get into future things. Oh my God, I can sell energy back to the grid. I can power my house, all the things that come down the line. But to me, it all comes back down to education and awareness and making sure that people understand not only is the product something that meets my lifestyle, but the whole ecosystem is going to make things easier than owning ours.
And I would just add one thing, because I know you're in the market research world. We still see a gap between what customers assume it will cost to install a charger in their house and the actual cost. So when you're already making a new purchase of an EV, and then, gosh, it's going to cost you another $1,000 or $2,000, or if you need a panel more than that, that's just an additional. So, policies that can support home charger installation, standardize, and that's going to help too. But just that home charger installation we're seeing another, again, as vehicles are on the lot, that's just another barrier that we have to kind of educate people on.
Yeah, I'm glad you said gap of awareness, because I think that also, back to where we started, out of home infrastructure, the situation still needs to improve. We're part of the Ionic joint venture as GMs too, and that to me speaks volumes. As we're putting our resources where our goals are and building what we hope will be the best network. But it's awareness, and because the situation is so much better, do people understand that? Our research says they a lot of times don't. So just seeing the chargers and making them evident goes a long way to alleviating the concerns, because you see a gas station at every corner. You don't have no qualms about where am I going to fill up. So if we get to that point with charging, that's going to be accelerating the adoption tremendously.
Yeah, we can show charts from Lauren or whoever on DCFC absolute stalls or ports installed. The more important is asking a new car. No, yeah, do you know that? Do you know? Are you confident you can get a charge? That perception, and that's done through signage and awareness. It's not done through, of course, getting them on apps is super important, but getting that signage along the highway. There's an FHWA standard for EV charging signs that should be a part of every public charging installation along interstates, because that's not only going to help people that own EVs, it's going to help the person who's going to buy an EV 2 and 3 years from now. That's really important, and it's just kind of some of the basic blocking and tackling, I think, that's going to get mainstream adopters more comfortable with purchasing an EV.
Okay, you guys touched on a couple of things that I want to ask Elizabeth about, because one, reliability, and I think that's always a topic of discussion anytime we mention EV charging. And when you're dealing with doling out taxpayer money, I know reliability is crucial 2, 3, 5 years down the road. But also, you brought up that EV drivers have to know where the chargers are at, and how is Illinois also tackling that of like letting people know that there is a charger? Because I think all of us as EV owners, we know because it's in our cars, in our app. But when you're thinking about an EV, you're like, I haven't seen one in the past 6 months. I don't know where they're at. So you would have to. How is it Illinois addressing those?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think one thing that we are realizing, this happened to me the other day. I got an email from someone in the public who has a charger near their house that is not working. And it's not, I went to look to see, it's not state funded. It's not federally funded. But the general public don't care. They just want to know that the charger works. And so we have a role with the projects that we are actually building, but also sort of more broadly with the infrastructure in the state and getting people confidence that when they need charge, it's going to be there. So that has been, I think, the perception of the NETI program in particular is that it's moving slowly, and it has been moving slowly, but it's partly because we are really trying to set up the program for success from the beginning and build in those provisions for reliability, build in the future proofing, build in making sure everybody's meeting those requirements, and to help sort of set the standard for the industry through some of these federal programs. And I think that's where, even if we're not seeing maybe as much infrastructure on the road quite yet as we might have hoped, building that foundation, I think, will really help going forward on the reliability side. And I think in general, as you all talked about, it's just really important to communicate about these, to get those signs out, to do road trips, and highlight the infrastructure that's out there in the channels where people are kind of looking for this on YouTube, on social media, meeting people where they're at, and doing more of that work is really critical. And then maybe the only other thing I would say is it's not just on the passenger side of it, especially in Illinois. We have a lot of communication to do with fleets, whether that's light duty fleets or medium and heavy duty fleets. Illinois is a freight hub for the nation and the world. And so that's really an area where we're really trying to build out our work. And we're excited. Soon we're going to be launching an RFP for that's in help in getting our Clean Fleet concierge program set up, which is doing a lot of that communication with those small and medium operators, to help them figure out what do they need to know, what do they need to know about the costs, to really get this beyond the first adopters.
And what are like two things? I think I agree signage is important. I also agree that, or not agree, I also think that if you see a charger in your community, that's more important. If you start seeing these things, and I think, who here has been to a charger and did work? Raise your hand. Yeah, all of us, right? And it's mad, especially if you're like rolling a charge, where you're like, what the fuck? Like, I want to get this thing on here. So the state of California is starting to fold with that, with some reliability regulations. It's almost providing kind of like visibility and transparency as like what stations are reliable and what they're not, and starting with data in order to, and then moving from that into building out like what are sort of like the sticks that you can get into that. So I think that's a good like state level piece of like, all right, we should totally tack reliability requirements when we're giving state funding, and like that California got better at that. We didn't do that at first. Then we should also make sure that we have understanding and visibility how reliable are those assets so that we can then go in and focus on those. And I do think it's like, I don't know if you guys have been, I've been an EV driver for a long time. And I had been at multiple charging stations where I've seen new EV drivers come in and not know how to use a charging station. And I just feel like it's important for me to like help them through that process. And it's not super easy. If you're like first starting to do a charger, it's not the most easiest process. So I think we need to also, the networks need to get a lot easier as well so that we can implement plug and charge. So we can go to it. So it's like, it's straightforward. You plug in and it just doesn't stay. So I think there's still a lot of work to kind of improve the overall user experience in order to get to that next stage.
Now, I was going to come to you next because yeah, I did. We've talked a lot about from the consumer's perspective, but I know PG&E, as well as every utility, is also heavily focused on getting fleet adoption to move forward. And we're coming up on our time limit. We're going to try to get back on track. Go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead. So when you talk about like the fleet perspective of utilities and the role that you guys are taking in that.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, we have a program that we've been focused on, like driving fleet adoption. It was supported by pretty like strict state policy that fleets need to adopt, and sticks around that. That was one of the many policies that was washed away with this federal administration. We still have it with some requirements on state agencies, but we've essentially been focusing more on like what are the economics. So how can we drive and improve consumer economics so if fleets want to do that? And large fleets, I won't name them, but large good movement fleets that you see driving around all day long, they have committed and they're moving forward with adopting EV infrastructure, and they get it. They get that the economics work. They get that at scale it makes sense. What we could be doing as well as is working and educating customers. So we have not a customer service, we call it advisors. There are folks that kind of work with fleets to each step of the process to help them figure out like right size their infrastructure. Because we get a lot of customers, like for example, school districts. They are bus operators. They're not energy managers. They don't know what's going on. They've never done a grid connection before. And so we're helping them figure out, okay, you don't need DC fast chargers. You need high power level 2s. We'll help you figure out where to put those. We'll help you figure out how to like right size that. And then you go on, you procure the infrastructure, and we'll set it up for you in a way that kind of helps you through to that process. So I think that's really critical in this early stage, because the big fleets, they're going to do it. They got folks, it makes sense. They're going to hire somebody and they're going to fix that solution. But to bring in the smaller fleets, these local entities, these government agencies, you got to provide them additional support. And I think utilities are a right source to do that. I think the state is also a good source in order to do that as well.
Excellent. Well, we are running out of time right now. We were going to do Q&A, but we want to get back on track for everybody else is trying to get to other sessions. But we'll finish up in 2030 or in 5 years from now. Will we still have range anxiety or charger anxiety? And we'll just work our way down. And
You said 20 years or 5 years?
5 years.
There'll be some, but I think it's so much better than it was a couple of years ago, and it's going to be so much better. It's going to be exponentially better. And I think the common theme to me today, it all comes back to the customer and awareness and education, because so much of it can be solved with helping the customer understand why these are good solutions and meet their needs with what's already there. And it's just going to be that much better 5 years.
100% agree with Yuval. I think we also have to realize that adoption is going to be uneven across geography, topography, demography. Just certain areas, certain transportation needs lend themselves much easier to electrification. That will get solved. That the time frame that gets solved for some of those more challenging ones is probably a little further out. But absolutely, I'm super optimistic about the next 5 years that the EV industry is going to continue to grow.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think where are you seeing areas where we don't see as much charging anxiety? It's not like the biggest impact, especially for the Bay Area and or high adoption. I think we're going to still see that lagging in a lot of the rural communities where we do have really long stretches. Although, if you look back at This year I did a trip to Mount Shasta on my EV. I could not have done that 2 years ago. And I was able to do that because we have for network or charging structure, bolstered from the private market, bolstered from NEVI, from utility programs, and we're ready to do that. So I think like we're seeing that, at least in my little neck of the woods, that's kind of getting less. The focus, I think, in it by 2021 is going to be, it's really easy for you to connect at your home, whether that be an apartment, a condo, or a single residential family. Like, you don't even have to think about it. It's just going to be really easy to do that. That's what's going to, that's cool. So.
Yeah, I would agree with the general optimism. I think one thing specific from my perspective on NEVI is I think in 5 years, we're going to start to see the first generation of NEVI stations come up against that end of the 5-year requirements. And so we'll start to see which ones of those stations are going to be able to continue to maintain themselves on and be financially viable without that federal support. And we may need to revisit the question of which ones are going to be maybe some more help or how does that shake out?
I just have one more comment that I want to make that people might not understand as we deal with the EV market. We'll put another 1.2-ish million EVs on the road this year. There will be several 100,000 EVs coming off lease this year looking for new EV drivers. Okay, so we can't forget about those people. Those are going to be those $20,000 vehicles, low mileage they're gonna find a home, and the drivers are going to need to feel comfortable. So as the used EV market becomes more robust, and it will as I think about the next 5 years, that's something to consider as well. They will just become more normalized. We're not taking EVs out of the fleet. EVs will continue to add to the car park for the next 5 to 10 years.
Awesome. Well, I love hearing everybody's optimism. I'm very excited for it. Now, your job is to go out there and make those connections so that can happen. Our panelists may be around if you need to come up and ask questions since we didn't get the Q&A, and have a great rest of your EV Charging Summit.